Today is August 1st, and exactly 150 years ago, America did something it had never done before. On this very date, a mining territory in the Rocky Mountains became the 38th state in the Union. It's a story of gold in the mountains, a president's proclamation, and a nickname that stuck because of a remarkable coincidence in timing, because the real story here is every bit as compelling as the legend. Stick around, because by the end, you'll understand why this one date, August 1st, matters more than almost anyone realizes. Let's rewind to 1875. Picture the country a little more than a decade removed from the Civil War, still stitching itself back together, still figuring out what kind of nation it was going to be next, a country healing, rebuilding, and slowly finding its footing again. And way out past the plains, up where the air gets thin and the peaks stay capped in snow even in summer, a rugged territory is knocking on the door, asking to become a state. Picture it for a second. Wagon roads winding up into thinner and thinner air, mining camps clinging to mountainsides, and somewhere back east in the halls of Congress, lawmakers weighing whether this high, rocky expanse was ready to stand as an equal among the states. On March 3 of that year, Congress passed what's called an Enabling Act for Colorado, essentially a green light, authorizing the territory to write its own constitution and take the next step toward statehood. Think of it less like a finish line and more like a starting gun. It wasn't automatic. It was Congress laying down the mechanics, draft a constitution, get it ratified by the people, and then only then would the door to the Union actually open. No shortcuts, no rubber stamp, just a careful, deliberate process that had to play out step by step, each stage depending on the one before it, with real people back in the territory doing the slow work of drafting and debating and voting before any of it could become official. But why Colorado and why now? To really understand it, we have to rewind even further, back to 1858 and 1859, when word first started spreading of gold near the eastern base of the Rocky Mountains. Imagine what that news must have felt like rippling eastward, the kind of rumor that could empty out a town overnight, whispered in saloons and printed in newspapers, growing bigger and shinier with every retelling until it was less a rumor and more a stampede waiting to happen. It triggered a rush, prospectors, dreamers, and fortune seekers pouring into the region, and Congress carved out the Colorado Territory in 1861 as settlements grew and demands for an organized government mounted. You can imagine the scramble, tents going up, makeshift towns appearing, and a government back east drawing new lines on a map to organize a rapidly changing region. Of course, this land wasn't empty when they arrived. The Ute people had long called the mountain regions home, while the Cheyenne and Arapaho lived across the plains, and it's worth pausing to acknowledge that their presence here long predated the gold rush that reshaped the region and brought so many newcomers streaming into it. Their history on this land stretches back long before any prospector ever panned a mountain stream, and that context matters as we tell the rest of this story. The mining didn't stop with gold, either. Beginning with a major silver strike in 1878, Leadville boomed with silver, drawing even more people and money into the new state. A second wave of fortune seekers arriving after the first, and cementing the idea that this was a place of real, lasting mineral wealth rather than a passing gold fever fluke. So layer on layer, first gold, then people, then infrastructure, then ambition, that population growth and all that wealth pulled straight out of the mountains helped drive Colorado's push for full statehood. It wasn't an abstract political idea. It was a territory that had grown and developed, a place whose momentum kept the question of statehood alive. So the Constitution gets written. The people ratify it on July 1, 1876. And now the final decision rests with President Ulysses S. Grant. Just imagine it, the paperwork completed on Colorado's end, awaiting the presidential proclamation that would finish what had been years in the making. Stick with me, because the timing here is where this gets interesting. Grant issued the proclamation on August 1st, 1876, and when you step back and look at the calendar, something remarkable comes into focus. This wasn't just any year for the United States. It was 1876, the very year America turned 100 years old. The nation's centennial. A year already thick with celebration, with reflection, with a whole country looking back at everything it had been through to get there. Through revolution, through growing pains, through a civil war barely a decade in the rearview mirror, all the way to this milestone birthday. Grant's proclamation admitted Colorado as the 38th state in the Union, and it happened in the same year the country was celebrating its own 100th birthday. Not 100 years to the day, that would have been the 4th of July, but close enough and symbolic enough that the connection endured. And that's exactly why Colorado picked up a nickname that's lasted a century and a half, the Centennial State. It's a nickname born of timing, of a territory happening to cross the finish line in America's 100th year. Among all the state nicknames in this country, few are tied so directly to a single, specific historical moment the way this one is. It's not about geography or industry or a local legend. It's a nickname that's really just a snapshot of a calendar page, a little piece of 1876 that got frozen in place and carried forward ever since. And Colorado's state flag, with its blue, white, gold, and red, tells another part of the state's story. The flag, adopted in 1911, was designed by Andrew Carlisle Johnson, and its colors evoke Colorado's natural features. Blue for Colorado's clear mountain skies, the kind of blue you only really see at high altitude, sharp and endless above the peaks. White for its snow-capped peaks, the same peaks that keep their white caps long after the valleys have turned green in the warmth of summer. Gold for the state's abundant sunshine. Red for Colorado's mineral-rich red soil, the color of the ground itself. It's a flag built from the land itself, from sky to snow to sun to soil, a design rooted not in a date on a calendar but in the actual landscape of the state. Which brings us back to today. Not just August 1st, but August 1st, 2026, the exact, precise, 150th anniversary of the day Ulysses S. Grant proclaimed Colorado a state in the Union. Say that out loud and it's almost dizzying. 150 years since a mining territory in the Rockies became the 38th state, in the very year the nation itself turned 100. Two milestones, stacked one on top of the other, both landing in the same golden stretch of 1876. On this day in history, Colorado's statehood stopped being a hope on paper and became permanent, no longer an enabling act, no longer a ratified constitution awaiting a proclamation, but an actual state. Colorado's star would officially be added to the United States flag on July 4, 1877, as federal law then provided, one more point of light added to the banner that had already carried the country through its first century. So here's what I'll leave you with. Colorado crossed the finish line in America's centennial year, a coincidence of timing that gave the state its enduring nickname. And while you're thinking about it, what other state's history or timing has ever caught you completely off guard? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone, and I'd love to go tell that story next.